Hello, everyone. Welcome to this AbleNet webinar. We are continuing with the Executive Function series, and today's focus topic would be cognitive flexibility. And I'm extremely grateful to AbleNet for giving us all this opportunity to go on this journey of learning about executive function. And as I mentioned, today's topic on executive function is cognitive flexibility. And cognitive flexibility is kind of shifting gears. How do we switch from one to the other, one rule to the other, one task to the other, one environment to the other, and also looking at different perspectives. And I will go into greater detail as we move through the presentation. But what I do want to emphasize is we are going to focus on cognitive flexibility, but the three elements, as the next few slides I will share with you, they are all interdependent and they work together. The other important thing I want to emphasize as we begin this webinar, it's fantastic that now we have the opportunity, thanks to neuroscience research, to learn more and more about how the brain functions and about executive function and its impact on academic success, school success, and life success itself. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking about issues that are connected, associated with cognitive flexibility, and what are some strategies that you can apply if there are some cognitive difficulties that your students are experiencing. Okay, I would like to find out who you are. Who is participating today in our webinar? Are you a special ed teacher, administrator, support staff, a general education teacher, a paraeducator, a parent, or other that I have missed out? Because students' executive function impact everyone, and of course it impacts the student and the students' interrelations, interactions with the other, especially in terms of the cognitive flexibility. I am waiting to see if everybody has voted. Okay, there are 41 people registered. You are still, looks like, only half. Okay, based on that other category, that may be the category that I omitted, and that may be a vision specialist, maybe a speech pathologist, OTs and PTs. There are a few administrators also, and there are some parents. I'm excited because executive function is not something that just happens and impacts school. It's something that is we need to focus on kind of almost throughout the day, and the school-home collaboration is extremely important for nurturing executive function skills. Okay, what kind of skills and expertise do I bring to this topic? I have listed several of my books, and each of my books you will find easy to implement, very practical strategies that are easy to use and easy to kind of apply, because many of them look at the problem and suggest strategies. And particularly there are two or three things that are listed on this page. One is a mini guide, and the other one is an autism book on positive behavior strategies, as well as a new book that just came out last month. especially the book that came out last month and one that came out end of last year, which is a mini guide, STEM guide, they focus quite a bit on executive function and what are some strategies that you can use. In addition, I'll be talking about a musical CD that educators can use for helping students with their transition. Anyway, you can go back and look at it anytime you want. There are all these resources and that I bring to this workshop. Okay. What are executive functions? We already looked at in the previous webinar that focused on working memory, some of the component elements, the components of executive function. And they are kind of the cognitive process, mental function that is required for children, and they are required for adults as well, to succeed academically, to succeed in school, and succeed in life. And in terms of executive function, it is the skill or the ability to be able to focus attention, draw information from focusing attention, push it from short-term memory into long-term memory, and be able to work with that information at a future date. That's kind of working memory. And then when you are doing that, you are also filtering out distractions, and you are controlling your impulses. You know, you don't get up from your seat and walk around the classroom when the teacher is delivering her lesson. That's kind of both self-control, and it's also a little bit of cognitive flexibility. And switching gears from one task to another, from one topic to another, looking at things from different perspectives, and adjusting to changing demands. So these are all kind of identified as executive function. Children are not born with these skills, but they do have the potential to gain strengths, to build on these and work on it and strengthen them in order to succeed both academically and in life. But it does require repeated practice, and it does require a nurturing environment. That's where we all come in. It's the executive function is what sets the stage for all future learning that takes place. And the sooner we begin the intervention, the better the outcomes will be. And as I mentioned, there are three core components or three mental functions or cognitive processes that are needed to build and strengthen executive function. We looked at working memory last time, and today's topic will be cognitive or mental flexibility, and the next webinar will focus on the self-control or the inhibitory control. And these three components really do not work in isolation. They do draw on the elements of each other. However, for the sake of planning our activities, it is helpful to look at each one of these categories or each one of these mental functions separately so that we can focus on what the students' needs are and try to advance the students' strengths. Executive functions, it's kind of think in terms of the how of learning. How do I learn? How do I provide those basic foundational building blocks in order to master the content of learning, the what of learning, the reading, the mathematics, and science? And as I mentioned before, there was a study that was done by Moffitt et al. Of course, it focused heavily on the next webinar's topic, much more on the inhibitory control. What they found, they looked at children 3 to 11 years of age, and for a period of over it was a longitudinal study. They looked at them for a period of 32 years, and I will go into greater detail maybe next time. And they found that EFs are critical for success not only in school but also in terms of friendships and jobs and for mental and physical health and for really quality of life later on. So we as educators and as parents, we lay the foundation for these crucial skills for future life and for success in school. Okay, what is cognitive flexibility? It's that capacity to be able to switch gears. When we want to adjust ourselves to change demands, I will give you an example. Suddenly, there is fire drill or tornado drill. You should be able to follow that instruction from when you were sitting in the desk and suddenly you have to switch your position, move and take instruction, and you have to act differently while you are generally required to sit at your desk. This is a time you have to be able to flexibly move. And you are doing a group project, and each one has a different role in that group project, and you have to be able to adjust and work with the others. And this is generally when you think in terms of the inside voice and the outside voice. So it helps when a student has cognitive flexibility strength, the student does not find it difficult to adjust to changing demands and different roles in different settings. And as Goldberg says, the ability to stay on track is an asset, but I'm saying I will only do it one way, but being dead in the track is not. And so cognitive inflexibility is not an asset. And self-control, persistence are assets, and rigidity is not. And children use this in a variety of tasks and in a number of situations. First and foremost, when we are learning the rules of grammar, when we are learning to speak, we say pencil, pencils, but when we say box, we say box. So pencil, box, pencils, plural is different, but box, pencil, boxes is, the rule is different. And that may be difficult for a child with cognitive flexibility. And it is important for us to understand that some children may experience cognitive flexibility issues, and I will mention the groups that may be much more at risk. And approaching a science experiment in different ways and getting it to work. When it doesn't work the first method, the second method. And it may be that it's in a preschool classroom or a kindergarten classroom, and the children are building a structure. And the structure keeps falling down. Then the child has the flexibility to look at another child and see how the other child is doing and how that structure is not falling. So what is it that I can do to modify my structure? Maybe that is, for example, that is cognitive flexibility. And when they are having a conflict with another child, what are some things I can do to resolve that conflict? Different approaches. And as I mentioned before, outside voices and inside voices and the different situation in which they should use each. In the classroom, they can be a little bit noisy, but in the hallway, they have to be quiet. But when they get to the playground, they can be really noisy. Or when they go into the cafeteria, they can be a little bit noisy. They can talk to each other. But when they go to the assembly for a program, they have to be absolutely quiet. And some children have difficulty. Others just look at other children and learn. And if they are given some verbal reminders, that may be. But some others will need deliberate work on nurturing these skills. And many of you who have joined here may be particularly interested in the population of students with autism spectrum disorder. And they do have, according to several researchers, that they have executive function differences. and they have difficulty with flexibility, and they also have self-regulation difficulties. As I said right at the beginning, these two components, the cognitive flexibility and the inhibitory control, especially in the case of children with autism spectrum disorder, they kind of actually much more closely connected, because the child, for example, with autism spectrum has difficulty with transition, and that difficulty with transition may be exhibited through a behavioral meltdown, which is kind of lack of control, lack of self-regulation, or the inability to control oneself. So there is some connection, but children with autism do have this kind of a difference in their cognitive flexibility levels. Shifting focus and changing from task to task, and if a routine gets changed, that's difficult for them, and it becomes challenging, and so they do need some preventive measures in place, and we will go over some of them. And this population of students with intellectual difficulties or intellectual differences, or students with intellectual disabilities, they may also experience some rigidity issues. I have done it one way, so they may find it difficult to switch to a different approach and to learn from models and approach the same problem in multiple ways. That may be difficult for them. And also, the working memory issues may also impact their flexibility. In other words, they may find it so difficult to draw information from their long-term memory, or it may not have transferred to their long-term memory, so that will impact their flexibility in working with especially math tasks or writing activities. So what are some generally cognitive flexibility issues that we usually associate with children with autism or children with executive function difficulties? And I really don't want just focus on children with autism spectrum disorder, children with intellectual disabilities. There's many others who have not been diagnosed may also experience these difficulties. I don't want you to think in terms only children have that. There may be others who are diagnosed, and let's try to help all of them in classroom, home situation. So first and foremost, thinking in terms of children with autism spectrum disorder, transitions often pose a big challenge for them. Transitions between activities, tasks, focus from one topic to the other, or environments, situations, or if you change your routine, all of those things present a problem. I will not forget how what I visited. As an educational consultant, I do get the opportunity to visit a number of classrooms, and I found when there was a tornado drill, 3 children went completely kind of, you could say, out of control because they started screaming because they could not handle the noise. And they had difficulty getting under the table. And they became somewhat aggressive because they were being forced to get under the table. So this is a situation where there should be some prevention and priming before this kind of a drill. Though maybe a question as to what we need to prepare for, because these are things that happen, but that's how we need to deal with this particular population. And if it is coping, similar to that, coping with seen unfamiliar events. I mean, children cannot necessarily make that connection that when they hear the fire drill, they need to get out of the classroom, or when they hear tornado drill, they have to get under the table. So they have to have some kind of a training prior to that to prepare them for that. Shifting focus from one task to the other, one topic to the other, one environment. Again, picture supports and visual supports will facilitate this process of their making that transition, making that switch. For example, it is difficult often for some of these children when there is a group conversation going on and someone is talking about something that happened that's kind of the student is sad about. My student with autism spectrum disorder may continue with a topic that's totally unrelated to the topic and may not show necessarily empathy, may not kind of communicate in the same line of thinking. So shifting focus from one topic to the other, or they may go on continuing with their own topic and extending it instead of empathizing and moving on to the next topic that the other students are talking about. Appreciating different perspectives in solving problems. And we will go into this with an example a little later in there, but that's also an important thing, that how do I appreciate different perspectives? Okay, I will give you a simple example, which is, for example, they are standing in line and one child accidentally bumps into the other. And students with autism, or some students who have cognitive flexibility issues as well as inhibitory control issues, may not interpret that as that was just unintended. They may consider it deliberate, and they may have difficulty letting go of their aggressive response to that action. And the other issue in terms of cognitive flexibility is accepting mistakes. And I did make an error, I will correct it, or I did act not correctly, that kind of thing. And one of the things that's recommended in research is how do we train in our children a growth mindset. So in other words, we try to teach them how to learn from their mistakes. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, difficulty with social interactions. So, what problems do you see? Identify in the next survey that you will see one problem, one cognitive inflexibility issue that you most often encounter when you are working with students or when you are a parent and you're working with your child. So go ahead and complete the survey. I hope you can see this slide. There are transition issues, shifting from topic to another, and coping, social interactions. Okay. It's I'll give it a few more seconds. Looks like I'm going to go ahead and skip to the results. Okay, it's very, very interesting. This transition issues seem to be a major, and it's possible that some of you feel many of these issues are equally important. Many of these issues are all something that you encounter on a daily basis with children who have cognitive flexibility issues or difficulties. Transition issue, yes, certainly. Shifting from topic or task to another, I can imagine that. And especially when it comes to unfamiliar and unexpected events. and social communication too. And it is possible, when I talk about accepting different perspective, it is possible that many of you may not have come across this if you're especially working with students with the most significant cognitive difficulties as well, and the opportunity may not have arisen. Okay, let's move on. We looked at issues, and it looks like transition is a major issue, coping is a major issue, social interaction is a major issue, and switching from topic to topic or task to task is also one of the major issues. So what are some things that will help? It is important that those of us who are working much more closely and providing a personalized support to these students, that we'll first look at what are the students' needs, what are their strengths, and in terms of what are their activity preferences, so that we can use that cleverly in terms of strengthening the students' cognitive flexibility. It is important to think in terms of environmental support. What can you do? It is very critical that students, especially who have cognitive flexibility issues, that we provide an environment that's always structured, have regular routines, and have predictability. And instructional support, think in terms of how can you adjust a complex task and modify it, the complexity level, the amount of time required to complete the task, or the amount of work itself. And not only the complexity level, but the amount of work that's required and the built-in breaks. How can we do that so that we provide instructional support? And gradually, you can increase the demand. But initially, if we have it as identical to everybody, then we encounter problems. What kind of visual support? And learners with autism spectrum disorders especially benefit from visuals, but all of us do benefit. Pictures do paint 1,000 words. And what kind of social support? And I will share with you a couple of ideas for that. And of course, self-regulation and calming, which we will go into much more next time, but that also helps with cognitive flexibility. And definitely assistive technology and technology itself will enable and empower communication, which will enable students to indicate their issues or communicate their issues, and which may reduce the flexibility issues. And one of the first things is visual support. It is important for students who are experiencing cognitive flexibility issues, especially when they have to transition or when they have to switch from a task to task. It is extremely important that they have a task list or they have a picture schedule. And even the task list is paired with pictures. And they have, if they have severe behavior issues that are connected with it, can they have cues, picture cues, paired with the rule, because research clearly shows that students with autism spectrum disorder do have strengths in visual learning. And as I mentioned before, how can we task? Instead of doing 50 problems or 30 problems, can we reduce it initially to maybe 5 problems, 1, 5, 10, and maybe 13 and 20? Can we make sure that the student has throughout the day built-in breaks so that at any given time they are not sitting at their desk for a long period of time, which may make it difficult for them to focus attention? And can we teach them to approach a problem and think about different solutions or different approaches? For example, let us say the student is standing in line and somebody is bumping in and the student reacts negatively. Can we take that as a situation and maybe do a kind of a little bit of a social story or social narrative and teach the student what are different ways can you approach this problem? When somebody bumps in, can you bring it to the attention of the other student? What are some things? What are some different solutions for that? So that is as simple an example as it is, but it will also teach them how to look at things from different perspectives that the other person did not intentionally hit, intentionally bump, intentionally hurt. Okay, so what are some cognitive flexibility builders? What are some tools that we can regularly use that will enable children to build and strengthen and practice cognitive flexibility? Okay, first and foremost, it is extremely important to plan and prepare ahead for transition. I'll give you two examples. One is where this particular classroom used what is called Fridays were fun days. In other words, they didn't follow the routine. They cooked and they watched movies for about a couple of years, and all afternoon was movie. And when I walked into the classroom, I found it was kind of a little bit of a chaos. A couple of students were watching, but about one student was lying on the floor, another student was under the chair. That's kind of a sudden switch. From Monday to Thursday, you follow a regular routine, but on Friday, you give up that routine. And to watch movie for 2 hours was too difficult for many of these students who had a lot of cognitive flexibility issues. So you do need a predictability and certain routine that's consistently followed. And the other one, as I mentioned before, for the sake of time, I will just stick to that example. That is, if you have, for example, fire drill or tornado drill or sudden changes, or you're going to the assembly and there is a change, it is important for students to know ahead of time. Yes, you cannot plan for a real fire or real tornado, but if they are already familiar through a variety of strategies, and again, I will show you how this can be done through video presentations, and you can do it also through role play so that you prepare, priming them for them. And brainstorming and group problem solving is also another technique, and sometimes we think brainstorming and problem solving is for students who are very high intellectually or with very strong cognitive skills. No, you can have a brainstorming, a graphic organizer, brain mapping tools paired with objects. But what we are doing is we are helping the student to look at the problem from diverse perspectives. And social narratives, these are social stories. By the way, Carol Gray's social story website, I did not see it working anymore. So there is Autism Internet modules. They have social narratives, and they give you examples, and that is included in the resources section at the end of this presentation. And of course, I cannot overemphasize the need for visual supports. Many children with both cognitive difficulties and with behavioral difficulties benefit tremendously from visual supports, and you really never need to get rid of this because this is something that they can themselves learn to use by themselves, and they themselves can learn to kind of pair the pictures gradually. So visual supports are always needed for many of these students. And the other thing that we use very little in many of our classrooms is role play. How can we role play a fire drill? How can we role play different perspectives? How can we role play, for example, a transition or a social conversation? And the other one, again, not much used, is group games. What they have found, the researchers have found, is there are games called the go, no-go games. And Simon Says, for example, is a great example. In other words, you do it when Simon says, but you don't do it when the phrase Simon says is not included. And I will share with you a few examples. And there are other games that you can also use. And moving on to the next one, prevention. As I mentioned before, prevention is one of the best intervention strategies, and that's what helps build. We cannot expect children to have cognitive flexibility if they have cognitive deficits. So we have to gradually train them. And through prevention measures and through priming and providing the necessary scaffolds, we address transition challenges and slowly increase the cognitive flexibility. And this is important for us to prepare in advance through visual support, through role play for transitions to routines, personnel, and provide advance warning whenever possible. If there is going to be an assembly and if we know ahead of time, we do need to prepare our students that there is going to be a change, and in your classroom schedule, you change the picture and show them. So that's another way. And priming. Priming, one of the techniques that you will actually see it explained very well in the Autism Internet module is what is called video-based instruction. And you will, before a class trip, how to, if they're going on a shopping trip, how to kind of what behaviors are expected in that situation compared to a classroom, compared to the playground. It may be a noisy environment in a shopping mall. It may be somewhat noisy in a grocery store if they are buying groceries. So how do we, if you can take some photographs and prime the students through video and prepare them then, or if you're going to a museum for a field trip, if you can take some pictures, and in a museum you really are very quiet. But in a grocery store, you may be able to talk a little bit. So if we can provide, these days with smartphones, it is quite simple to prepare these pictures and put them as part of a PowerPoint presentation or a video presentation. And that is where our technology will come in. We can even have students prepare these PowerPoint presentations and share it with the others. We can even have students, use it as a slide and print it out so that they can share it with each other. So these are all things that we can do to kind of prepare ahead of time. Priming before a transition is important, and video and PowerPoint and photographs would be great help. And these are some tools, and of course, when the slide transitions from my presentation to the ready talk, there is some movement of these pictures. Let's say if you want to emphasize that they cannot talk too loudly or scream or shout in a particular setting, or if you want to kind of show them, there is this particular figure that shows like a door, and it says bead. What it is really a cord. It's a cardstock, and you use the Chanel stems, or what used to be called the pipe cleaners. You put that, and then the bead, insert the bead onto it, and then you move it up and down this stem or Chanel stems, and then you can point out, is it too loud, is it just right, is it too soft, and you don't have to use words, and they visually see it, and you don't have to pair it with auditory warning. You can also use rule cue cards, and again with pictures at different settings what they need to do. And if you are at a large gathering and you are looking at where they should be sitting, you may even want to take a mat with you, and if they are in an assembly, and in the beginning part of what you would do would be you would be the last person who is going into this assembly gathering, and then so that it is easier for you to get out. But at the same time, you might even want to take a little mat or some kind of a rug, and they sit on it so that the student who has difficulty, but gradually increase the time that they are able to sit there and be part and demonstrate that cognitive flexibility to adjust that to adjust to that new environment. Another thing is first then, many of you may be already familiar with that you do, let's say, 10 minutes of math work, and then you get 2 minutes of working on the computer or feeding the fish, and then you get back to the math, and then you finish 5 more minutes, and then you get 5 minutes or it may be a break time, it may be some other activity, or maybe they go to the reset station or the calming station. And another kind of thing, and in every one of these, I have not necessarily paired the pictures, and again, the letters and some of it has moved a little bit. Each one of these things, it's ideal if you can pair the words, the text, with the pictures. And you can provide a student an activity schedule inside a folder, a manila folder. You can also give a task completion chart so that as they finish, they put a check mark, and there is a certain sense of joy and thrill associated when they complete it, and then they hand it in. So this will help them to move from one task to the other. And let's move on. And what are some other supports you can provide? Signal upcoming transitions. Provide kind of a warning. You can use timers. You can verbally cue them. You can also pair it with a picture cue. You can say when the activity will begin and when it will finish, and you can explain to them how they will transition from one activity to the other. And one of the things that I would like to mention here, especially with younger children when they are about 4 to about maybe almost 7, 8 years of age, you can use musical support for transitioning between activities. And this would perfectly work in maybe kindergarten, first grade, pre-K classrooms, and even second grade, if second grade, if it's especially a self-contained setting. What this particular CD is the one that the music therapist and I have put together. It's designed with the application of music therapy principles. These are mini songs, and they provide guidance and directions to the students so that when they are moving from one activity to another, or when they are moving from one location to another, the music will help them. What it does is, for example, it cues them about the next thing that they will go into. There are songs in this particular CD. You can also make up your own songs. These are songs that piggyback songs based on traditional rhymes, and only thing is the lyrics suit the occasion. In other words, if they are just coming into the classroom, which you can use with all, if there is an arrival song. If they are making a transition, let's say, from one activity to another, like, for example, you are moving into snack time, then the song just for that particular student, you can use it, or you can use it for the entire classroom. Or if you're doing lunch and they have one student or two students just have difficulty, then you can just use it. Now it's lunchtime, it's time to go to lunch, and it is the lyrics will say now it's time to go to lunch, but it will use a traditional song. And some children, I have noticed it myself, after recess, they have difficulty coming back into the classroom, and they are not able to give up the swing or the slide where they are playing. So there is a song that talks about recess is over, and it to the tune of Farewell Jacques. And the other option you can also do is to play a kind of a musical instrument. And one of the instruments that I have found in a way very unique, and the sounds are kind of very distinct, and it's called a stir xylophone. And it helps students to kind of move from one activity. After they play that, they know that's a signal to move to the next activity. So that's something you can also use. And you can also use an advanced warning card, and that is there to move them from one preferred activity, especially to a required activity. Or you can use it the other way around. they are working on an activity and it's almost done, they can stop and move on. But I think it is best to use it for a preferred activity so that you can time it for, just say they're working on a computer and that's their preferred activity, no more than 7 minutes, no more than 8 minutes. And then 2 minutes before that, you move it to the yellow one, almost done, and then you move it to the stop one. And they gradually trained. In the beginning, you may encounter difficulties, but actually after they gain some control, they will themselves start using it. And I mentioned earlier about social narratives and social scripts, and you will find more information at the Autism Internet modules. It kind of gives a visual format for these social narratives, and it helps children how to respond to social situations, how to engage in conversation, how to communicate their thoughts, and how to kind of not perseverate on their own topic of interest, but also lend their ears to what other children are saying. And the next one is project-based activities, and I do want to spend a couple of minutes on this one because sometimes we think project-based activities are only for students who are higher functioning or who do not have significant cognitive difficulties, but project-based activities, group activities are extremely important for students to gain not just only social skills, but also cognitive flexibility because they have to adjust to each other and work on that task as a group. And let me give you some examples of what they can do in order to do a group project, especially it may be in a self-contained setting. It may be for students with significant cognitive difficulty. It may be for students with autism spectrum disorder or intellectual disabilities. But what are some examples? Okay, the group project could be, for example, a collage. A collage focusing on the presidents. And maybe a history project. It's a collage, and in that collage, some students will attach some sentences focusing on that president. Some students may just put the name. Some students may put kind of the date. But they all work together and they create that collage about a historical period, let's say the civil rights period, and they are doing something about the civil rights. They may make a timeline. They can make a collage, and each one can contribute depending on their skill level, and it can be paired with a lot of pictures, and it can be supported with a word bank, and they work together, but because they are working together and producing this collage, there is a lot of back and forth interaction and communication which strengthens cognitive flexibility, because it is listening to the other person. The other person puts that picture in a certain location, and you work together and you adjust. Another example would be, for example, something that I shared in one of my previous webinars about universal design for learning, and that is a measurement group project. They are maintaining a log for about a week on the outside and the inside temperature, and they identify the hottest day and the coldest day and all that. And one person may be actually measuring, one person may be recording it, one person may be identifying given kind of a space in that thermometer, a dot that they put in with the help of another student. So in other words, they are depending on each other, they are teaching each other, and they are modeling for each other. And so that strengthens cognitive flexibility, and it helps them develop different solutions. What can we do? Where can we put this picture? Or how can we put this dot on the thermometer? Who is going to carry the thermometer today? Who is going to actually do the measurement? And the other thing that I mentioned earlier is games and movement activities. And students learn to adjust their behavior depending on the changing rules. And adjusting to rules, as we learned earlier, is one of the big challenges in terms of cognitive flexibility. And they play group games and they have movement activities depending on the age level and depending on the cognitive level, depending on whether it is an inclusive setting or it is a self-contained setting. You can adjust these games. Group games enable children to wait their turn and take their turns. When they are playing a group game, let's say you spend 20 minutes each day on a group game. It can be as simple as tic-tac-toe, or it can be something like a vocabulary game. But when they have learned how to wait their turn, and not blurt out, not say things when it is not their turn, it is something, in other words, they hold a card, and that card will say, a picture card that will say, for example, quiet mouth, ears listening, or your turn, and then there is a color card that says they take their card before they speak, and when somebody has a card in their hand, you don't take their turn, you wait. So there are a variety of ways you can adjust. I'm sure you can come up with many creative ways when you are playing games to teach children how to wait their turns. And one of the things, go, no, go, that I mentioned earlier, it's playing the opposite game. You can do it a couple of ways. One is you can do it in terms of the teacher giving a direction and then also showing a picture. In other words, the students ignore the picture or they follow the teacher, which would be easier, and ignore the picture. So in other words, you can do it two ways. I hope I said it correctly. The teacher has a picture that says clap hands, and the teacher actually does. What she does is she turns around. So you ask the student, do as I say, not as I show. In other words, not what is in the picture, but do what I say. So it kind of creates, in the beginning, it's going to be a lot of errors. There is going to be a lot of laughter because children may not be doing it, but this is the opposite game, or go, no, go. The same way for younger children, you would do Simon Says. And you can also do the opposite. Okay, when Simon says sit down, you stand up. If Simon says clap your hands, you don't clap your hands, you hold your hands still. So in other words, it's kind of a little bit of a trick and a bit more complexity added to it, but these are games, the opposite game and the Simon Says games will help develop that flexibility. Music and movement. When music stops, do what the picture says. So that's another way. And freeze dance. And then another one is pretend play. And with younger children, when you have a dramatic play center, they are pretending and help children to plan ahead for this pretend game. That's another way they strengthen their flexibility. Another important thing that I think everyone can benefit from is using role play activities, because they have to play a different character than who they are, and that also builds flexibility. One of the resources that you would appreciate very much is a book by Ellen Galinsky. Her book is called Mind in the Making. She talks about 7 essential life skills, and she gives a lot of examples of building cognitive flexibility, self-control, and critical thinking and all that, and you will find that to be a very useful resource. Some additional resources or puzzles that you can use, crossword puzzles, and some of your students with autism may be very good at this, and encourage that, and that may be their preferred task, and that may be their break time activity. And these are also things that you can use to build cognitive flexibility. And a variety of resources are listed. as well as some of the references mentioned in this presentation. As I repeatedly mentioned, Autism Internet modules have a lot of information, particularly for students with autism, but they don't necessarily talk about executive function, but they do talk about resources and video modeling and all that. Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University has lots and lots of resources about executive function, and there are one assessment tool for those of you diagnosticians. If you're looking at its assessment tool, this Essentials of Cross-Battery Assessment, that will also help in assessing for EF strengths or deficits. And then there are a variety of resources, and some of my resources, as well as the Magical Musical Transition, which is sold by National Professional Resources, are also listed. And some more resources, and some of the books that I mentioned about earlier, and the STEM guide and the new book that also focus heavily on both universal design for learning and executive function are listed here. Again, thank you very much. As we close this webinar, I want to thank AbleNet for making this webinar possible for us today.